You're a Civic Engagement Fellow, and just a little show of hands here. So these are our students who volunteered their time as Civic Engagement Fellows. So again, welcome on behalf of Millersville University. I have the honor of introducing Dr. Joyce Davis. Dr. Davis is an opinion editor for Penn Live, which she joined in March 2019. She's a veteran journalist, author, communications professional, and accomplished public speaker who has lived and worked around the globe for some of the most respected news organizations in the world. She is formerly Director of Communications for the City of Harrisburg. Dr. Davis served as Associate Director of Broadcasting for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Those are really cool organizations. Check them out for jobs, students. And supervised broadcast and internet services in many, many countries. Dr. Davis spent 8 years as an editor and correspondent with National Public Radio, and was also deputy foreign editor and correspondent for Knight Ridder newspapers, once the nation's second largest newspaper chain. So Dr. Davis, I'd like to welcome you to Millersville University to introduce tonight's speaker.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I guess you guys can hear me pretty well, right? So I just want you to relax and really try to engage tonight, because this is really about helping you better understand diplomacy and why we need it, why we need to stop these darn wars all the time, right? And this is done especially for you. We have invited this ambassador here who himself has already met with some students, but we are the World Affairs Council of Harrisburg. That's what we are. We're part of a national network known as the World Affairs Councils of America. Our mission is to help people throughout our country better engage, better understand international issues and many different cultures. We promote international travel, but here's what I also want you to know. We have a summer internship program for college students. And if you're interested, just let me know. Check our website, World Affairs Council of Harrisburg, and you will find an application there. We're starting to take applications now. We're taking from college as well as high school students. But we do all kinds of things. We don't just bring in great ambassadors. We also get down and help you understand what's going on locally, nationally, and internationally. And we do a lot on Zoom and on the internet. So check us out. I will only tell you that Michelle Anger, our program director, is behind us. She's going to help stream this live to our Facebook page. You can check it out there if you think you missed something. But with that, let me introduce the man of the hour, of the night. And that is Ambassador Polt. He assumed his position as ASU Ambassador in Residence in the College Leadership, Diplomacy, and National Security Lab on October 1st, 2020. Prior to his current position, Ambassador Polt served as Senior Director at the university's McCain Institute for International Leadership after concluding a 35-year diplomatic career. He did that in 2012. He's held assignments as U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Estonia and to Serbia and Montenegro. Prior to his ambassadorial missions, he was Principal Deputy and Acting Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs in the Powell and the Clinton State Departments. And during his 3 years as a career diplomat, Ambassador Polt served as U.S. Minister and Deputy Chief of Mission of the U.S. Embassy in Berlin, and Deputy Chief of Mission and Chargé d'Affaires of the U.S. Embassy in Bern, Switzerland. He has served as Senior Advisor to the Director General of the Foreign Service for the Management Reform and was key member of the Senior Management Steering Board directing the State Department's 2023 to 2025 multi-million-dollar reinvention of the diplomatic communications system. He has held, his bio goes on and on, he's held senior positions in the Department of State as Deputy Director for European Security and Arms Controls Issues in Panama City as Political Counselor of the U.S. Embassy during the time leading up to the U.S. military action against the Noriega regime. That was in 1989. Some of you probably weren't born. But during his earliest career, he was assigned to embassies in Bonn, Mexico City, and Copenhagen, as well as the U.S. consulate in Bremen, Germany. He has been the repeated recipient of the Presidential Meritorious Service Award and numerous Department of State Meritorious and Superior Honors Awards for outstanding policy, leadership, management, crisis performance, and political analysis. He's been awarded the Thomas Jefferson Award for service to U.S. citizens overseas by the American Citizens Abroad. Ambassador Polt was born in Austria. He and his wife Haley live in suburban Northern Virginia. They have 2 grown children, and they enjoy skiing for relaxation and a good cup of coffee with the time to enjoy it. But before I turn it over to Ambassador Polt, I want to tell you that his wife Haley is actually from these parts. So he may tell you a little bit more about that, right? Ambassador, you've got the podium.
First, thank you very much for that overly generous introduction. And let me just start by, let me first start by saying I do have other ties. I have a whole bunch, I didn't know, I would have worn a different one, so I have other ties. But what I want to say is, back in June 1961, a president of the United States stepped off an aircraft in Air Force One in France and said, I'm the man who accompanied Jackie to Europe. So I will say tonight, I'm the man who accompanied Hallie back to Mexico. Hallie was born in Lancaster General Hospital here in this town. And her grandparents, George Aaron and Emma Smith, graduated from Millersville in 1921. And she is, we discovered some of the artifacts that date back to what her grandparents did here at this wonderful school that we have the opportunity to be part of. So, thank you very much for allowing me to come today and to talk about the U.S. Foreign Service, but more broadly, U.S. foreign policy and why you should care. So I want to start by talk a little bit about who we are. I hope this works. Yes, can I, is that, please? I'm sorry. Yes, I can't do Joyce's sheet. So, this is who we are. I represent Arizona State University. We have a Washington Center in downtown DC. And a former Army 3-star and I founded the ASU Leadership Diplomacy and National Security Lab at ASU some 4 years ago. Today I'm with you together with the cooperation of the Una Chapman Cox Foundation, which is a private foundation that has actively supported U.S. diplomacy for many, many decades, and is a member of the American Academy of Diplomacy, which is a professional association of career U.S. ambassadors. So I'd like to talk to you about what we do and who we are. A team of us, former career diplomats, have gotten together and decided that we need to go ahead and make some active steps to bring our diplomacy, to advance our diplomacy into a 21st century skill set. The basis of, this is who we are as the ASU Leadership Diplomacy and National Security Lab. The basis of our argumentation is that bottom bold statement there, that the essence of leadership is trust. The argument that we put forward, and I'd like to test it out with you tonight as an opening the gambit, and that is, if you look around the world today, and you look at conflict, failed societies, human suffering, and you want to pinpoint one single element that's common to all these tragic situations, we argue to you that it is either absent, failed, or malignant leadership. Therefore, leadership, and leadership by character, is a critical element in advancing U.S. interests and therefore, I would argue to you, world peace. We aim to transform the way the United States pursues and achieves its global diplomatic efforts. And with that, we've put forward four blueprints that represent active steps that we could take to make those modernization steps go forward and to be implemented. And tonight I would like to talk to you about why you should care about this and what it is meant, what our diplomacy is meant to address. We have made four commitments. Number one, that everything we do is transparent. There's nothing secret about what we're up to. We are strictly bipartisan in the sense that we have no political agenda, not left, not right, not up, not down. We have no political agenda. We believe that the United States must have the world's most modern and able diplomatic service, that you deserve the most modern and able diplomatic service. And we do this not because we are graybeards, former diplomats. We do this because of our colleagues who are still serving. It is for them and for you who hired them to do this that we're making these proposals. And nothing that we do, we have not coordinated with the State Department and with the administration and with Capitol Hill to make sure that we're not so often some private crusade that's just us talking, but rather it's about you. And it's about our colleagues who are serving you as we speak right now. Why now? Dr. King talked about the fierce urgency of now. And I'm just giving you a few bullets here, including the one that I'll let you fill in by yourself. Just to give you an example as to why now. As if that wasn't enough. So what's happening in Ukraine? What's happening in the Gaza Strip? What's happening as we speak in the South China Sea about the freedom of navigation? It's what's happening about climate change. The pandemic we just went through, where we all hope and pray, but hope, as we always say in our lab, is not a method. We hope and pray, nevertheless, that we've learned lessons from what we just went through. I'm not yet sure I'm able to answer that question. I hope you can, maybe you can educate me. But the point is, global pandemics, like climate change, don't need visas to cross borders. They don't respect national boundaries. They don't respect, I don't want to engage in this, so therefore leave me alone. They don't care. They're going to affect you whether you like to engage or not. Arms proliferation. The Brittany, whom we just brought back from being held hostage in the Soviet Union, in old man, so in Russia, was traded for a known Russian arms dealer. We did that because she's more important to us than keeping him. But arms proliferation is something that really should be on your agenda of things that concern you. Because the flow of arms to nefarious actors is a real danger to the United States and everybody living inside her. And border security is not just about our southern border. It's not just about the admitted challenges that we face there that we have not yet sufficiently addressed in a more humane way. But it is about the fact that borders are crossed every single day, not just through fences, but at actual border crossings and ports of entry, with all kinds of things influencing our way of life without our complete ability to go ahead and control it. And the question becomes, well, how do we address these global situations? By what means? And if I were to ask you that in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, how do we address the aftermath? Well, how do we address the 9/11 tragedy and disaster? What did we do? Did we send all of our diplomats around the world and said, okay, go ahead and get them? Or did we send the US military and said, go kill him? Now, I'm all for killing Saddam Hussein. I'm all for Hamas living with the consequences of their attack on Israel. But is that the only way we're going to act on behalf of our interests? And what should come first? My partner in the ASU Leadership Diplomacy and National Security Lab is a retired Army 3-star. And his first and last words about what he finds is most important in what we do, and what's most important in our diplomacy is that diplomacy is first. And he and the 10th Mountain Division, which he commanded, comes way after our diplomacy. And when we talk a little bit about what kind of resources we dedicate as a nation to our diplomacy, you'll see what the difference is in terms of how much we actually bring to the table for our diplomatic and development engagement. So let's talk a little bit about the 4 blueprints. These are the 4. The first one is an enhanced mandate for how the Foreign Service operates. I'll talk about what that means. Second is to train our diplomats and make them as ready as they can possibly be for 21st century challenges to America's interests around the world. We have to be able to be much more nimble in the way we bring people in and hire them to bring them into our diplomatic service. Joyce knows this very well. We are a little bit bureaucratic, a little bit too government in the way we do this. We need to do this more the Google way. Okay? We need to be fast because we're competing for the brilliant minds of our young people. We're competing with people outside who can do this faster and better than we can. We need to be as good as they are in bringing people on board. And finally, very importantly, I want to spend a considerable amount of time this evening about Polt number 4, about a diplomatic reserve corps. I'm going to get into all these details in just a moment. Let's start with the enhanced mandate. Our diplomats, led by our ambassadors overseas, need to be the most experienced foreign policy leaders that we have. I hate to tell you that that's not always the case. Because we have a system, which I'm not criticizing, it is our system. The ambassadors of the United States are the representatives of the President of the United States, and he, and in the future she, can appoint anybody he or she wants to into that position, subject to the Senate confirmation. Sometimes, and I've worked in my diplomatic career for a number of so-called non-career ambassadors who have been absolutely brilliant, who have served you very well, and you should be proud of them and you should thank them for their service. I've also worked for a few that should never have come anywhere near leading a U.S. diplomatic mission overseas. I think we need to make sure that we send our ambassadors out, just like the rest of our diplomatic corps, with the mandate that when they come from the professional diplomatic service or from outside the diplomatic service, they need to know what they're doing. The joke I made with the students earlier today is that when you go in for that brain surgery at the hospital, you don't want the taxi driver who took you there to do the surgery. You actually want the surgeon to do that. And I think our diplomatic service deserves the respect to expect that kind of professionalism for our diplomacy as well. The Foreign Service also needs a broad vision, decisive culture, and enhanced capabilities. What do we mean by this? To effectively engage the American people. We've proposed a program where people like I, but better yet, people who are still serving right now, will regularly engage with all of you to discuss with you what you expect from them and what they bring to the table on behalf of you. So we'll work together with people like Joyce, we'll work together with people like this university, work with civic groups around the country, with any of you who are willing to go ahead and take a little bit out of your day to sit down with you and talk to you about what's the U.S. doing. Why are we in Afghanistan? Why are we in Europe? What's NATO all about? Why do we care about the South China Sea? Why is Gaza the way it is? Why is our relationship with Israel the way it is? Now, we can have in our Q&A, we can talk about all those things at your leisure. But the point here is that we do not right now have an organized way of engaging with you. It's basically catch as catch can. When an American diplomat comes home from an overseas assignment, goes to his or her hometown, if they get an invitation to speak to someone, they will do so. They are always happy to do so. But there is no concentrate, there is no bureau in Washington, the State Department, that says, Mike Polt, you're coming home from Panama. I want you to go out and talk to four of Joyce's organizations around the country. Here are your orders. Here's your ticket. Get out there and do it. I think we need to do that. Because my suspicion is that if you do that, you might find a reason, number one, to support what we do, or even better, tell us what we should be doing. And frankly speaking, during my 35 years, I wish I had heard a little bit more, or had listened a little bit more to what you want from us, rather than me just going out there and doing what I do. Education and training. That third bullet on there are foreign languages. And my friend and I were talking about this earlier today about his Russian language studies. It is so critical for us to study not only the substance of our professional engagement in the various areas of the Foreign Service work, but particularly to understand the language and the culture of the country. Because you know this better than I do, because you are a professional communicator. It is so critical to be able to go ahead and get into a culture of a foreign country through the language, to understand it better and to be able to interact with it better. Now, why does that not happen? Because the Foreign Service are a bunch of rules and they don't want to learn, and they don't want to study? No. The reason that we put so much emphasis on this is because right now, the Foreign Service is 13% of Foreign Service positions around the world are unfilled. Why? The State Department doesn't have enough money to fill all those positions. So when it comes to a choice between training and preparation for diplomats to go out and do their job, and filling a job that's been empty for a year, what's going to be the answer by the human resource people at the State Department? Get yourself out there and go sit in that chair and go do your work. And therefore we no longer have the time dedicated for the training to get our people to be as capable as they need to be to do the best they can do. So we are advocating a training complement for the Foreign Service, which currently stands at 4%, which is by the way meaningless, because with 30% of positions unfilled, 4% is meaningless. The 30% need to be filled, and we need to have 8% of our State Department workforce at any one time in training. And who taught us that? Colin Luther Powell. A general who came to the State Department, the Secretary of State, and said, so, Polt, tell me how many, you've been in the Foreign Service for 20-some years, how much time did you spend in training? And Mr. Secretary, I had 2 weeks early on, and then I had another month later on, maybe about 2 months overall. He says, you must be kidding. So General Secretary Powell spent about a grand total of 15 years in training throughout his career, his storied career, leading to 4-star national security advisor, Secretary of State, in some kind of training all along. And he's the one who gave us the initial 4%, which was very quickly swallowed up by the 13% gap. So we have put together legislative language, which we have proposed to Capitol Hill, to go ahead and mandate that, and to underpin the mandate for that training flow with the necessary appropriations, which I'm going to get to in just a minute, to go ahead and actually deliver the resources to be able to afford that. And I'm going to show it to you in just a moment, and you can tell me whether you think you can afford it or not, because it's your money that we're talking about spending. Your money. Next is the overall approach to human resource management, and that is putting the right number of people in the right places. Recruiting for diversity and the skill set for the 21st century. Now, recruiting for diversity is not this empty phrase of DEIA. Recruiting for diversity is to look at America and say, my God, what a bunch of talented people. When we go abroad, what makes the most impact on people outside of our borders about who we are when we say we are in the United States, we are the shining city in the hill, we are the special people. What makes the most impact on them when we say that? Not our big mouth. It's our big people. And I'm not talking about my size. I'm talking about the fact that we have talented people in every part of our society, which need to be reflected in our representatives around the world. That means every color, every gender, every background, every ethnicity, whatever it is, and we need to make an active attempt, not because we're being told that's the politically correct thing to do, but because it's the most effective way to deliver the goods for the American people in terms of representing the American interests. So we have written legislation for that as well. And again, legislation not just in terms of authorization, you must do this, but in appropriation, and here are the resources to do this. And now, one of our pet projects where we actually are starting to make a bit of a headway. When we left Afghanistan, there was a huge need for State Department assets to deal with the consequences of that withdrawal. Bringing Americans out, providing visas for the people who supported us who need to flee the country because of the Taliban takeover. And the only way we could meet that resource need was to go ahead and rob Peter and pay Paul. The State Department has no surge capacity. Remember I said 13% of positions are unfilled actually. Not only does it have no surge capacity, it has a big hole. So if we need any kind of a special push for a certain need, whether that be in Afghanistan, or at the Gaza Strip today, or in Haiti, or in Taiwan after the earthquake, if any issues that result from that, we have to take it from somewhere else, where they're already serving, and send them there. So we have proposed creating a 1,000-person diplomatic reserve, like we have the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands in the military. Just 1,000 diplomatic reserve members in all various categories to go ahead and provide that surge capacity that is needed. I was at an event at the State Department a couple of weeks ago, hosted by the Deputy Secretary of State, and they actually agree with us. And they have begun to walk the path of a pilot study to go ahead and create the beginnings of such a surge reserve corps, to go ahead and provide the State Department that capacity. It's a little bit too smaller than we had envisioned, but the principle is established. The Deputy Secretary, Ambassador Richard Berman, is absolutely outstanding, and they're walking the path, and we're going to come to them on that one, and trust that this is going to yield the necessary gains for our ability to go ahead and meet emergency needs. These people have to be paid. Not much. They have to be paid something. They have to be put on alert like the National Guard and the Reserves. And when they're called up, they have to go. Now, you should ask me now, so what's all this going to cost? As you talk a great game, Polt, but tax hour, pay too much tax in this. So, the training complement to get the State Department up to 8%, $212 million a year. The Diplomatic Reserve Corps, $45 million a year. Engage America, that's the little tiny program I was talking about, of sending 50 diplomats per year around the country that's only one per state, to go ahead and engage you on what kind of diplomacy, what kind of foreign policy you expect from them. If we did all this, that would increase the diplomacy and development budget of the United States by 0.5%. So you say, well, that's a lot of money. Almost $300 million. 0.5%. Now, what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? The total federal budget is about $6.5 trillion. Of it, the international affairs budget is $60.1 billion in FY24. That is less than 1% of the entire US federal budget. It's spent on all of our diplomacy, every embassy and consulate of the United States around the world, and every foreign aid dollar other than military that USAID dispenses around the world. Less than 1%. So the question to you is that a legitimate expense of your taxpayer dollars? In FY24, that international affairs budget got a 6% cut. Our argument is that that's not going to do it. We need to do better than that. Even if you doubled the international affairs budget to 2% of the US federal budget, you will still be able to, we would argue, you're still able to afford it. And now let's talk about the alternative cost. Well, first of all, let's talk about staffing. The State Department has 86,000 people in it. That means everybody at home, everybody around the world, in these categories. 14,000 foreign service officers, in the foreign service, not all officers in the foreign service. 12,000 in the civil service, domestically. 10,000 in USAID, and 50,000 locally employed employees in all of our embassies around the world. As you probably know, our embassies are heavily staffed by local country nationals who are important assets to our understanding, our ability to go ahead and do work in the countries where they're employed. 86,000 people in the State Department. That compares to 1.4 million in our active duty military, 732,000 in theater civilians, 240,000 members of Homeland Security, and nearly 900,000 people in intelligence. So, in terms of bang for the buck and overall dedication of human resources to achieve our national goals, we suggest that 86,000 does not deserve a 6% cut. What's the alternative cost? If diplomacy fails, and I'm glad to take me on if you're overstating the case. If diplomacy fails, here's the consequence. Most importantly, American lives, American treasure. That's the consequence of diplomacy failure. And then the question becomes for us is it worth more than less than 1% of the federal budget to avoid the most important number here, and that's American lives being lost? That is our proposition of our entire blueprint effort, the one that we're continuing tonight, and that is reflected in what Secretary George Shultz, who was Secretary of State in the early to late 80s, talked about in assessing what the American people want of their foreign policy. I think it's a wonderful statement, because you do expect us to reflect the values that you carry forward, and you want us to be effective. And if you believe what George Shultz said, then I think it would be appropriate to dedicate the necessary resources to achieve those goals if you think it's right. And the final comment I have for you tonight before we go talk about some Q&A. Is what my former boss, Colin Powell, said about resources and mission. I hear him, I see him in front of me saying this to us over and over and over again. And most importantly, talking to people in Capitol Hill and talking to people in the administration, in the executive branch. Do not give people a mission if you're not going to give them the resources. So the question I would like to leave you with tonight, before we go to Q&A, is how much are you willing to invest in your proposal? And I think it's totally legitimate for you to say, not as much as you want, Paul. But I'm willing to do this. Or, I don't think that this is the right way, and here's a better way. Most importantly is not even the outcome, it's the fact that we need to engage on this issue as citizens in this country. And not just simply say, well, what these clowns in Washington do, who knows anyway. Whatever they're going to do, they're probably going to mess it up. But don't forget, the clowns in Washington are the ones we sent there, right? So if we sent them there, then we better go ahead and send them with the necessary instructions as to what we want them to do. And the only way for us to decide what it is we want them to do is for us to have a conversation about what that is. So what is that? So that's just my brief presentation to you about our 4 blueprints. And I'd love to go ahead and have that conversation with you as much as Joyce would.
I really did. I thought you brought it home, you made it clear what we're investing in diplomacy and what perhaps needs to be invested. But before we turn it up, I want to ask you guys, honestly, do you think those wars going on around the world have anything to do with you? You think it's going to ever affect you at all? Do you think? I mean, I'm just like, especially our young people. What do you think? Do you think it, or you think you'll never have to worry about going to Lithuania? Or yes.
All wars eventually affect you because a change in leadership means a change in who you're dealing with. And then
We have big mouths, but you're in their mouths.
All wars eventually end up affecting you because a change in leadership means a change in who you're dealing with, and that means they could be more unpredictable than the last person or more prone to violence than the last person. Just because you see war there doesn't mean that the leadership won't take the war to you if they see fit to bring it.
First, may I follow
Yes,
up?
you may.
Excellent answer. I would like to follow up with you, if I may, for this moment. Do you believe that America's engagement globally contributes to avoiding wars or sometimes gets us into wars? Where do you come out on that issue?
I feel that ultimately America tends to stick its nose into issues where we don't belong, and then the issues we actually do need to get involved, we don't stick our nose in it.
This is really important. Can you give an example?
I'm trying to think because I talk about it with my dad often because he's retired military.
Mm-hmm.
I feel with Vietnam, we stuck our nose where we were in alone.
Amen.
And
Amen.
we got bit for it, and we don't like to say that we got bit for it.
You know what? Thank you for that. You were right about. You're right. I agree with you. You don't need my validation at all. Back to the Paris Peace Conference after it ended the U.S. engagement in the Vietnam War. After Vietnam had won. We were told to use it because it's not going to help us carry.
it's hard to hear at the back.
You need to just be the boss and tell me. I'm perfectly happy. I followed orders from that lady over there. I can do this. At the Paris Peace Conference that ended the U.S. engagement in the Vietnam War, as North Vietnam had won, an American senior officer talked to a Chinese senior officer. As you know, China heavily supported the North Vietnamese cause. The American senior officer said to the Chinese officer, "You know you never defeated us in a battle." And the Chinese officer said, "It's of no importance." because in the end result, here we are. So the consequence, the overall, the trajectory of Chinese thinking about Vietnam and its future, based on where China had come from throughout its history, was so much bigger and so much longer than our tactical, operational focus on you can't defeat us in battle because we have the best army, we've got the best armor, we've got the best weapons, we've got the best tactics, was immaterial because the outcome was exactly the one they were shooting for. So I hear what you're saying, but then the question that we are left with is that when the US chooses not to engage, to outcomes, if I agree with you that outcomes when the US engage sometimes go bad, how many outcomes go bad when the US chooses not to engage? And you said it in your first comment, and that's something to stick in those where we shouldn't, and we don't stick in those where we should. So good for you.
Well, that was why I asked the question, because my fear, and I think the fear of other people in this room and ambassadors, is that if we don't deal with some of this global aggression now, if we don't improve our ability to prevent wars, that you will have to go and fight something before you get our age, right? That's our fear. That's why he's about doing what he's doing right now, right? So, but I'm going to step back again, just one more step back before I really open it. And I'm going to ask you, we talk about the ambassadors, we talk about diplomacy, but I don't think people really know what that means. What do you do on a daily basis? I mean, what's a good day to you as an ambassador?
You know, this is really an important question that you should be able to answer. I should not have to tell you this. You should be telling me what I did. All of your diplomats go out, number one, to be the face and the voice of America around the world, because all of you are not always there, but they are. So, I'll give you an example. When a citizen of, pick one of my countries, Serbia, when a Serbian citizen comes to the American embassy in Belgrade asking for a visa to come to the United States, whom do they encounter? An American diplomat. Yes, ma'am? Whom do they encounter?
Usually a consular?
Consular officer, exactly right. An American consular officer. So, just like when you go to the DMV, you all know that example, how you walk away from that engagement at the DMV is really important as to how you feel about your state. If you sat there for 8 hours and they finally called you and told you you've got the wrong documents, come back tomorrow, you're not going to feel that great about the state of Pennsylvania at the end of that, or in my case, Virginia. So when you come to the consular officer in Belgrade and say, ask for a visa, well, the answer may be yes, you can, or no, you can't. Either way, how you walk away from that engagement in terms of how you were treated in that encounter is what your diplomats do. One of the first things that they do. How do they make people feel about their encounter with that person from Serbia may have never met another American. That's the only one she will have ever seen. Whatever she walks away from that encounter with is going to be what she concludes the Americans are like. That's one of the first things your diplomats do. That whatever they say or do has to reflect what George Shultz said. Reflect the values that we espouse as a nation. And I would submit to you the values we espouse as a nation is respect for each other. Despite our divisions here, we can yell at each other all we want to, we can argue, we can fight politically, do whatever we want to, but we do value respect, at least so my mom did. Okay? And so did yours, I suspect. So that's the first thing we do. We are the face and the voice of America. Then we are also the interpreters in chief of what these crazy people who are not like us actually are about. The biggest challenge that your diplomats face, your ambassadors, but all the other diplomats, is to tell Washington, This is how the Estonians feel about this. This is what the Panamanians actually think about Noriega. This is what the Mexicans actually think you're doing versus what you think they're doing. And often the debates that we have amongst each other as Americans are much more heated than the arguments we have as foreigners. Because people in Washington think that the world is made in their image and that's the way it is. And that's not the way it is. It is the way the world is made by whoever makes the world outside our borders, and it's not us. So that's the other thing we do, and that is the interpretation. And then ultimately speaking, we also separate fact from fiction. That's what we're doing this time. We separate fact from fiction. I was telling students here today that I am sorry, and I don't want to offend any of you, but there is no such thing as alternative facts. There are no alternative facts. If it's something that is open to debate, you can disagree, that's okay. But if I say, like I was saying earlier, today, that was not sunshine coming down. That was water. That's rain. And it's a fact. There is no alternative interpretation as to what my drive was like from DC to here. It was in rain. That is what diplomats do as well, because they have to analyze and interpret, not just interpret what's happening, they also have to then say, okay, well, what are you going to do about it, big boy? What's going to be your answer to, now you've explained to me how the Estonians feel, well, what are you going to do about that? Or let's take something more current that you are familiar with in your daily news consumption. How do the Ukrainians survive without our support? Your diplomats say, I've been there, I have talked to them, I have seen them in action, I have seen them dying on behalf of something that we all firmly believe in, and that is the inviolability of borders and national sovereignty and the right of other people to determine their own fate on their own without an outside coming telling them what to do. And therefore, we need to support them, and this is what they need. That's what the diplomats do as well. So that's just 3 examples of the kind of things that it's not about, I can assure you, and Hallie can assure you, it's not about parties and receptions. That is the worst part of our duty. I hated receptions. I hated the, various, just standing there, my feet were hurting, I wanted to desperately go home, but I stayed there for that interpretation and analysis part. But it's not about living a good life. None of the diplomats get paid enough to have lived a good life. They don't.
And then you're in dangerous situations. They're in countries that are unstable. It's not like they're all, although I will say this, I was in Paris for a year as a journalist not much older than you, and I was absolutely shocked that the ambassador did not speak French. Did not. How can you be in Paris and not speak a word of French? Didn't even want to learn. So that's when he's talking about the training that's needed so that you really can be those ears and eyes for the American people. Because if you don't speak the language, there's no way you can really effectively do anything.
And that gets back to, Joyce, thank you very much for that. This is such an important point that you're making. That gets back to that percentage about 30% unfilled positions and the training float. Because you can't train people in those languages unless they're released from their duties to go ahead and learn the language. I will tell you one thing though, that you need to know, because what Joyce is saying is so important. Your diplomats are the best out there. Despite all the things I've just said to you, they're the best out there. Not because I was in it, in fact, I probably got better when I left. But they are the best simply because they are fully dedicated, they are smart to begin with when they come in, even if you don't train them, and they are fully trainable when you give them the opportunity to go ahead and learn. In contrast to my military colleague, my partner in the Leadership Diplomacy and National Security Lab, who has gotten an entire career's worth of formalized, systematic training. Most of my training, most of Hallie's and my training in diplomatic service was seat of the pants, learn by doing. What I'd like to do, that of course also includes all the mistakes I made. What I'd like to do is to minimize the mistake part and maximize the performance part. And we can do that by some of the things that we proposed here.
So let's open it up. I mean, you obviously have, because I can talk all night about this. Go ahead. Get to the first.
So you mentioned in the presentation about transparency and diplomacy and how it's key to what we do.
Transparency.
And I think about the USSR in this case where we had embassies that were kind of interlinked with intelligence. Do you think, or do you have an opinion on the way that we go about diplomacy in adversarial countries or countries that we are currently in with the Cold War with?
So the question was about transparency and how do we deal in embassies where we have an adversarial relationship with the host country. And how do we do this? Now, I'm glad you asked that question because it brings up something I should have said earlier about overt and covert intelligence collection. Your diplomats are intelligence collectors, but they're overt intelligence collectors. They don't meet in dark alleys. They don't pass little bags of whatever's inside to somebody else. They don't do any fancy James Bond stuff. In fact, they're pretty boring. But they're constantly collecting information and providing it for analysis. We afford each other, even with our adversaries, the opportunity to do that. You know, the most adversarial diplomatic posts Hallie and I had were Serbia and Panama. In both situations, the relationship with the government was very, very tense. In Panama, it was virtually non-existent. And yet I still talked to people in the Panamanian leadership about our differences and gave them access to me to tell me about how they differed with us. Because only that way can you possibly avoid the militarization of foreign policy by saying, well, we'll just wait till we all get mad enough at each other and start shooting. That is not the answer that we seek. So the answer that we seek is, I think it's virtually more important to talk to the people we don't agree with than the people we do agree with. Because with all due respect to my Estonian friends, and I love my Estonian friends, I mean, I really love my Estonian friends, but they already love me too. So why not talk to the Serbs who really don't love me? I know they don't. I really want to hear from them. I really want to engage with them. And I talked to the students earlier today about the concept of public diplomacy, something which didn't, were you in that group? So you know, I talked about this whole concept of public diplomacy, a concept which didn't exist when Hallie and I joined the Foreign Service in the late 70s. Because by definition, diplomacy wasn't to be public. You do that behind the scenes. Now, public diplomacy is very much at the center of our diplomatic effort. And that is, when I'm in an adversarial situation, like you were just asking me about, in a country where the government relationship is very difficult, well, then you go out and talk to the regular people in the street. As long as they don't stop you, as long as the government doesn't stop you, and often they can't because of diplomatic niceties or diplomatic rules of conduct, then you can go ahead and engage. And I think both Hallie and I were more popular with the Serbian people than we were ever with the Serbian government. The Serbian government, I don't think that's ever going to really work. But the Serbian people, we have lots of Serbian friends, and that's a good thing.
Other questions?
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm not a student here. I'm a cybersecurity consultant by training. And I heard this talk was going on, so I came here to talk. So thank you very much. My question was, you know, maybe because I'm in the field, so we hear a lot about cyber warfare, you know, cyber attacks and how they're going pervasive and how they're more of a threat to national security. But we hear so much about cyber warfare, yet I've never heard anything about cyber diplomacy or anything. You know, you mentioned the role of diplomacy in preventing warfare. The future of warfare is in cyber, yet I've never heard any kind of diplomacy or reconciliation in cyberspace. And as somebody who spent a lot of time in this field, I wanted to ask what your field is about these topics. Thank you.
That's really a 21st 21st-century question. It really is.
That's fantastic. Less than good question asking. Perfect. I'm a 70-year-old white dude. And you asked a 21st century, very smart, intelligent question. Again, when we joined the Foreign Service, cyberspace, Ali was mentioning it today, to date us. Our first computers were WANs. Most of you, even the ones who are politely smiling, don't even know what a WAN is. And you shouldn't. But the fact is, we had virtually no real capacity. The internet, I don't know why I haven't invented it yet. It didn't exist, but you are so right in terms of why isn't that up there on our chart when we talk a lot about kinetic, this is old style, kinetic conflict, what's happening in cyberspace, and what is now commonly called hybrid warfare is the current reality, and much more likely the combat zone than actually the kinetic one. I mean, what Putin is doing to the Ukrainian people is actually antediluvian. It's downright medieval what he's doing to them. But what he did before that, and what he did when we were in Estonia, was already alongside of your question. That is, when we arrived in Estonia, they had just a year or two before we got there been subject to the first distributed denial of service attack emanating from a foreign country on another sovereign country, from Russia into Estonia. The subject was a very traditional one. The Estonian government had moved a Soviet-era war memorial from the downtown of the capital of Tallinn to a military cemetery to the outskirts of town. And sure enough, by a total accident, within 24 hours, the entire net in Serbia went down. ATMs didn't work, banks couldn't make transfers. Governments. What did I say?
You said Serbia.
Thank you. See, that's why she always comes along. I put it out every single time. In Estonia went down. And but to the great credit of the Estonians, within about 72 hours, they had brought their systems back up, and learned the lessons from that they've been teaching the rest of the world, including us, since then, as to how one hardens one's systems and providing the necessary resilience to live in the kind of era that you are asking about. Now, the State Department, in fairness, is, for a government bureaucracy, catching on. Okay? It now has a data policy, a data collection policy, a data protection policy, a cyberspace presence, both in terms of offense, and I don't mean offense now in terms of an attack, but in terms of outreach, as well as protecting the existing systems, and of course dealing with such things as deepfakes and misinformation and disinformation and all the things that go with this. It's way behind, like our country is way behind. You know this much better than I do. And the only thing I can say there to you in our defense is, we need people like you to go ahead and make us do the right thing. And what I found in Estonia, and I'll stop with that, a little bit deeper than my knowledge will allow. What I found the Estonians did so well is, they used people like you. They combined the obvious talents and the experience of the private sector, which was far beyond what the government could bring to the table, and brought it together and gave them access to the government decision-making and policy implementation process, and formed basically a national cyber force, National Guard. And now Estonian private sector and the Estonian government work together both in delivering government services at the most modern level that you can imagine, better than you. And at the same time, they're also better at dealing with whatever is going to come across from particularly the eastern border as they look at what's going on in Ukraine today and what's going to happen afterwards. Thank you for that question.
I'd like to also make sure I get your information. Several of our World Affairs Councils are looking at doing a series of programs over the next few months, looking at the future of AI. And I think one of the issues clearly with cyber war, but also what can cyber diplomacy do to prevent it? I mean, what could that? So please give me your information. Maybe we can call on you for your expertise. How are we doing on time, guys?
It's 7:30.
Okay, so maybe we'll take one more question, and then I'm going to throw two questions, I guess, here. I don't want to, and then I'm going to throw it out to you because you have to figure out what you're going to do about what he's told you.
So I know we just mentioned AI, and that was actually the basis of my question. So I know AI, or artificial intelligence, has come onto the scene in the last few years and kind of made a big point in American society. So how do you think AI might shape the future of diplomacy, and how might the international community can find some sort of common agreement or foster a positive use for the technology?
I'll do my best, and you be the judge of whether it's the intelligent 70-year-old white guy answer on this issue. I'll start first with the old-fashioned answer, and that is, I believe firmly that you can never replace being there in terms of human beings interacting in what is a people business called diplomacy. And I'll go back one step further in history. Back when the Soviet Union collapsed, long before AI and quantum computing became on anybody's lips, a certain level of US leadership and global leadership decided that that was the end of history, and from that time forward, old-fashioned stuff like diplomacy will not necessarily be needed anymore. We could just, we could have a good computer in each capital, and then every once in a while we could message each other. Obviously, this is silly. Being there is critical. Human interaction is critical. Now, where does, in my opinion, AI come into the diplomatic equation in the future? With all the things that I don't really even understand about the potential end of civilization of AI, let's go to the positive side for a moment. The State Department's data policy, which is actually already published, you can look it up on the State Department website, actually talks about the use of AI as basically the intelligent assistance to our diplomacy. Where suddenly the kind of assumptions you had to make about certain kind of information or data, because you didn't have it readily at hand for yourself, could be replaced by artificial intelligence that could actually provide you a full set of data to make better decisions, to better advance policy. So I think it can be I predict it's going to be a very powerful tool in our diplomacy going forward, in government policy overall. The biggest problem, though, is not going to be the reluctance of diplomats to use it, because younger diplomats are totally with you and with him. But it's going to be the ability of our government to go ahead and allow it. Because our legislative action in defining what is the appropriate use of artificial intelligence and how we set certain barriers as to where it should not go and where it must go, etc., is so far behind the technological advance in this area that the ability to go ahead and deploy it is hindered by the fact that we are not ready as a in governance to go ahead and deploy it. But I think it's going to be an unbelievably, if I think of the times when I have been overseas, far away from home, that if I could have asked an intelligent assistant, tell me this, and then walk out and engage with somebody outside the United States on an issue, and blow them away because I knew more than they did, that's what it's always about in every negotiation. You want to know more than the other guy does. Because then you might be able to find a win-win situation by knowing what you're able to give them and what you have to go ahead and stand for. And AI can help you in that regard. Now, of course, in the future, you have to realize that if you've got an intelligent system, so does the other.
Exactly.
You're not the only one who saw that. That's the problem. It's a great point. And of course, that's why we need you to join our diplomatic service. Instead of saying, I don't want this, I'm going to go make big bucks on Wall Street.
Well, that's a question to ask. How many of you guys are just thinking about maybe you want to be a foreign citizen? All right. Well, look at this. Okay, you're recruiting. There was a question over here too, wasn't there?
I just want to jump back to the blueprint. I want to jump back to the blueprint for a second
Yes.
and ask. So it looks like you've taken like a nonpartisan approach. You've addressed a lot of issues that there can be bipartisan agreement on or concerns about. So what's been your biggest pushback? And if it's money, can we get specifically why it's not valued?
It is money. In fairness, there are two things. Let's start the first one with money, then let's go to the other one, which is actually even more complicated. The pushback so far from our former colleagues and from leadership is you don't understand what the budget environment is for our foreign affairs budget. You don't understand that not only can we not deliver these extra $270-some-odd million that you guys are asking for, we're getting a 6% cut in FY24. You guys don't understand that we're overworked and overtaxed already. And you're getting us to think about all these things that you want to do to go ahead and put forward. We're not able to go ahead and deal with things from yesterday, and you want us to go ahead and do and pay for the things for tomorrow. So that's the first biggest reaction we're getting, even by the people who basically agree with us. And I'll give you the example of our work with the Diplomatic Reserve Corps. Our idea of 1,000 people in that search capacity is going to cost $40 million a year. The State Department pilot program that they are considering is they're going to ask for $15 million to do a pilot, to examine the issue, to see what kind of skill sets they would need, and then how they would implement it. That's all good. We're with that. You have to do that. But 15 million doesn't get it, doesn't take us there. And we have said that, in fairness. Now, the other one is about the professional competence of our diplomatic leadership. And that's the one that I unfortunately don't really have an answer for except you and we raising the issue and saying, we expect our diplomats to know what they're doing. So when you read an article about, and again, I'm not talking about school here because this is public, distributed information. The State Department Office of the Inspector General publishes unclassified versions of what are called inspections of our embassies around the world, in which they rate our diplomats' performance, including the ambassador. I encourage you can sign up for that and it'll end up in your inbox. I encourage you to sign up for that. And then when you see, OIG Office of the Inspector General has inspected Embassy XYZ, spend a few minutes and read it and see what they say. And if they criticize, it doesn't matter if it's a career or political ambassador, if they criticize an individual, then you might want to consider next time you have a conversation amongst your colleagues, or next time your congressman comes down and says, so what's on your mind? You say, well, one thing that's on my mind is, how come, Embassy X had an ambassador who could barely find a garage? Okay? And again, I'm not trying to be facetious or flippant here. All I'm saying is that you deserve, like I was saying in your earlier slide, you deserve the best diplomacy that you can be. And it's up to you to go ahead and make a demand. Just like when you go to the DMV and you expect to be serviced and to get the driver's license or the license plates without a lot of grief. That's the same principle. So those two things. First, resources. Number two, the professional qualifications of our diplomatic leadership. Because of our system, which you're not going to change. Ever since Benjamin Franklin went to Paris, presidents sent non-career diplomats into the field. And that's perfectly okay. That's good. Because sometimes, as I said, give you one example. I used to work for an ambassador in Germany, Arthur Burns, who for like 20 years was the Chamber of Federal Reserve Board. He had no diplomatic experience, but he was absolutely brilliant. He came to Germany when he was already 80 years old. Just in case you think age matters. I was 20-something, and he ran circles around me. He had me exhausted, lying in the aisles. He was that good, and he was not a career diplomat. So it's not about career versus non-career, it's about competence. And the current Deputy Secretary of State, Richard Berman, came from Capitol Hill. He's a professional lawyer. He was appointed, he was Assistant Secretary. He succeeded me to be the Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs. Became Ambassador to India. He's an Indian American. He's now the Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources. He's absolutely brilliant. So just demand that level of brilliance. And those two things of the political push and pull as to who gets appointed to these leadership positions and getting the resources to make our diplomacy really count. Thank you very much for coming tonight and for listening to us. I really appreciate it.